Hello, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the networking and have also had a chance to take a brief comfort break there. We're now going live with our first panel of the day and your chance to get involved and ask some questions as well here. So we're talking about how are banks innovating to support customers with gambling problems. And I'm delighted to be joined by an expert panel. We have Natalie Ledward of Monzo, Matt Robinson of Barclays and Charlotte Grannan of Natwest. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have speakers making brief remarks about the work that their bank is doing to support customers with gambling, and then we'll open out the discussion and take questions. So please continue to use the event chat to tell us if you've got any questions you would like our panel to answer. I know we've had lots of brilliant conversation in there so far. Please keep it going. And just to say, the earlier in this conversation that you ask those questions, the more likely it is that our panel will be able to answer them. So please don't hold back. Tell us your questions as quickly as you can. We're going to go straight into it, and we're going to start with Charlotte. So Charlotte looks after the Natwest, RBS and Ulster North policy for customers in vulnerable situations, supporting these businesses to create inclusive design ideas, working with regulatory bodies to implement changes within these businesses, and supporting colleagues with communication and education on vulnerability. Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. I make up a part of a wider team looking after customers in vulnerable situations. As mentioned, I look after the policy and also look after the journey. So as our teams are building product designs and service designs, I work with them to make sure that we're considering vulnerability. As part of my wider team, we also have a team that looks after the education of our frontline teams, and also a team that look after the protection of customers. These guys are called the customer protection teams, which I will touch on later, but they basically are there to offer one-on-one support for our customers. So let's have a little look at what we're doing within Natwest to support customers who are struggling with gambling. So as a purpose-led organisation, we are committed to championing potential, helping people, families and businesses to thrive. If our customers and communities and the economy succeed, then we will succeed. Being a purposeful bank recognises that our businesses are made up of a network of relationships with multiple stakeholders with different interests. We play a central role in the UK economy and in our customers' lives. That brings a deep responsibility to the communities that we serve and to wider society, and we must balance the needs of all of our stakeholders. It therefore follows that we are committed to protecting customers from gambling and related gambling harm, and we continue to innovate and develop new ways in which we can support customers, including during these difficult periods of time. We recognise that the harm and problem gambling can cause and have introduced a package of measures aimed to help customers take control of their gambling behaviour. As part of the bank, we are proud to partner with GamCare to offer the use of unused consultating rooms with our branches, allowing counsellors to offer treatment and services to users. Whilst the introduction of social distancing has meant that we've had to put a pause on the service, we're in active discussions with GamCare to extend the services across the UK into more branches, following a successful pilot within London and the South East. And once we have guidance from the government and they indicate it is safe for us to do so, we will continue on with that work. We've also introduced a warm handoff process for our customers to talk to GamCare, where we effectively support our customers in the crossover of handing them over to GamCare. GamCare have also provided training to our debt management operations teams and on how to support customers and who want to stop gambling. And we are also proud to have joined GamCare as part of the new gambling-related financial harm panel. The panel brings together industry experts from banking, debt advice, gambling treatment and gambling industries to create tools and standardised support for those experiencing financial harm relating to gambling. As a bank, we've also been doing other work within the gambling space. We currently have several policies in place to address gambling behaviour and review them regularly. We exclude customers from limit increases and decline lending applications on credit cards, loans and overdrafts if customers breach their gambling thresholds. We've also introduced new features to allow customers to manage and control how they use their credit card, such as lock and unlock features, setting usage alerts and blocking specific payment channels, including online. And whilst these aren't specifically gambling blocks, they provide customers greater control and autonomy over how they use and choose to use their credit card. We regularly look for ways to enhance our colleagues' understanding and awareness of addictions and provide them with information to help customers in vulnerable situations. In August, we launched a service called Banking My Way. This helps our colleagues better understand the customer support needs, and the service lets the customer tell us about their circumstances that they are facing. They can also tell us how they would like us to support them as they interact with us through their banking. The information they provide is recorded on a central system and is available for our colleagues to view, and customers don't need to repeat themselves every time that they need help and assistance from us. Customers can share as little or as much information as they would like, and they will be prompted annually to update this information with us. All customer-facing colleagues receive regular training to help identify vulnerable customers, and in addition, our specialist debt management colleagues receive specialist training from PayPlan and Business Debt Line. We've partnered with Money Advice Trust to develop training courses for our colleagues to help them improve the support they provide for people with addictions, most commonly gambling, drugs and alcohol. And we have also been involved in case studies. Earlier this year, Money Advice Trust also delivered specialist training to over 700 frontline colleagues in our debt management operations teams. And our dedicated specialist support teams for vulnerable customers took nearly 35,000 calls in 2019. Since 2015, our debt management operations have also partnered with the Citizens Advice Bureau to support vulnerable customers. And we provide 5 Citizens Advice advisors who sit within alongside our colleagues to provide customers with independent advice. Over 4,000 of those customers have been referred to since the partnership began, and 50% of those referrals are new customers into the Citizens Advice Bureau. Since 2018, our senior personal bankers have completed nearly 2 million financial health checks. This free review is focused around our customers' needs, goals, and considering all areas of their finances. If we become concerned about a customer, or if a customer asks for help with gambling problems, we will refer them to our Customer Protection Manager team, who reduce withdrawal limits, cancel cards, and place blocks on gambling merchant codes with the customer's consent. Customer Protection Managers also signpost customers to gambling support services such as GamCare, National Problem Gambling Clinics, Gamblers Anonymous, and GamAnon. We have 10 Customer Protection Managers across the United Kingdom and Ireland, whose role is to help safeguard customers with financial abuse and protect customers in vulnerable situations, including those with gambling problems. We continue to listen, learn and act on this topic, and we gain insight from our customers, colleagues and experts. Thank you. That's from me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlotte. Gosh, what a lot Natwest is doing there to try to support customers with these challenges. Next, we're going to hear from Natalie. Natalie works across vulnerability, accessibility and financial inclusion at Monzo. She became the first winner of the Which Your Consumer Champion Award in 2019 for her work to create a gambling block that protects vulnerable customers. She previously worked for Apple, specialising in training, and run events with charities and organisations to help people with disabilities access technology. At Monzo, she uses her experience to develop ideas to reduce barriers and empower customers in order to help Monzo with its mission to make money work for everyone. Natalie, I'd love to hear your opening remarks.
Hello, thank you. So I am Natalie. I sort of lead the approach to vulnerable customers at Monzo, and we're a digital bank with no branches, so that brings its own set of challenges. But Monzo sees supporting customers who are struggling with gambling as a really important issue. So our sort of mission is to make money work for everyone. And that means offering all customers financial visibility and control, and a clear understanding of your spending, along with helpful tools to manage it in your app. We've grown lots in the last few years. We're still quite a new bank, but we're now at over 4.6 million customers. And our demographic is changing, but generally the more prominent vulnerabilities that we see at Monzo are related to mental health and addiction. So it's really because of this that we focus on things like gambling harm, simply because it's what our customers tell us that they're struggling with. In 2018, Monzo was the first UK bank to introduce a gambling block on a current account. And it came from our customers. They were requesting it, they were asking us for it. So it was a very customer-led initiative. And at the time that we built the gambling block, conversations about gambling was one of the more common queries coming through to the specialist support team. More than 2 years later, it still is. So alongside the research we carried out to develop the block, we had a series of meetings with experts in the area, and the advice they all had was, if you're going to do it, it needs friction. So we worked with Sharon Collard and a team at Bristol University to land on 48 hours, being a sensible amount of time to give customers space to change their mind. So our gambling block works by being really easy to turn it on, but then it has 2 sets of friction in place to turn it off, and that's 48-hour cooldown period, and you have to chat to customer support first. So we've now had the gambling block in place for more than 2 years. We've had lots of positive feedback about it from our customers, but we do know there's still work to do to understand how effective it is, how our customers are using it, and what we could improve. What we know so far is that a sizable number of our customers use it. They have the block activated, so that's about 5% of our entire customer base. And in more than 2 years, only around 10% of customers have turned it off. 10% of the customers who have used it, that is. So although that suggests that the friction largely works, what's most interesting is we haven't really dug yet into those 10% of people who have switched it off and what their experience has been like. So that's work that we're really looking forward to kind of doing in the next year or two. We were hoping to do that this year, and then our attention, much like everyone else's, quickly turned to reacting to the pandemic and making sure our customers were supported. But we'd very much like to pick up on the work in this area again. It seems quite timely, responding to the flurry of recent publications and recommendations coming from the same experts we spoke to in 2018 on what we should, as banks, do next. So people want to see banks doing the right thing, and the reaction to us releasing the gambling block in 2018 was really positive. The day the BBC covered Danny's story, who I know you're hearing from later, we saw a huge spike in new account signups. I might be wrong, but I think it was our biggest day of signups to date at that time. And then I was also lucky enough to win the award, the Which Award, for my contributions to the block. And that helped Monzo get lots of exposure, but more importantly, it started conversation, I think, and it's really the reason why I'm here today. So just to listen, to learn, and to think about what's next for us at Monzo. So thank you for inviting me.
You are very welcome, Natalie. Thank you for being here and for all the hard work you've done at Monzo leading the way in this area. Our next speaker is Matt from Barclays. So after a 22-year career in a variety of technology roles, Matt was given an opportunity to move across to working within the customer vulnerability function in Barclays in 2018. Leading on propositional design linked to mental health challenges and other cognitive differences that can impair capacity to manage finances, Matt also has dual responsibility for this alongside the delegated authority customer journey. His overarching objective is to lead the change agenda for how Barclays supports customers with impaired and insufficient mental capacity, and to build new ways to enable supportive as opposed to substitutive decision making, which is something that is very close to our hearts here at Money and Mental Health. Matt, we'd love to hear your opening thoughts on what banks can do to help and what you're doing at Barclays.
Katie, thank you, and let me be the first to say I'd forgotten I wrote all that, and I shamelessly stole that last part around supportive versus substitute decision making from one of your events that I think I attended last year or so on a little help from my friends. So credit where credit's due there. I thought it was so good, I thought I had to continue to use it in a description for my purpose. So just following on from what we've heard this morning, Barclays introduced our gambling control in December 2018, and we introduced that as part of a suite of card controls, debit card controls we launched to our customers, and specifically it's one of several merchant category controls, so you can switch off your ability to spend against certain merchant category types, including gambling transactions. And having features like this, as we've seen this year, is more important than ever before. Our internal data shows us that gambling transactions have increased by 32% during 2020 and rising sharply as soon after we entered lockdown. And card controls generally have been used over 150,000 times by our customers during that lockdown period, and the control is used an average of over 30,000 times a month by our customers that use those suite of controls available to them. And all these things go to show that Barclays is truly committed to constantly evolving the support that we give to our customers living in vulnerable circumstances. And this very much includes those people impacted by problem levels of gambling and indeed forms of gambling addiction. Now, Barclays really does understand that gambling and financial difficulty often come hand in hand, and that crucially customers find it very difficult to ask for help. And indeed, in our own quantitative research into customer attitudes, into identifying vulnerability through the use of data, we looked at scenarios where customers had recently begun spending increased amounts of money on online gambling. And that research showed that 72% of those people questioned were in favour of the bank taking some sort of action, proactive action, that is, either an offer of direct support, a referral to an external organisation, signposting to useful material online, and so on. So knowing this, we decided to test, and we designed a test and learn pilot in the beginnings of 2020, and we identified customers who we thought were potentially financially vulnerable through their levels of problem gambling, and we contacted them to offer help and support. So when we compiled the cohort of customers that we wanted to talk to, we looked at a number of data variables. We looked at customers who'd used our merchant control and were toggling it, crucially, were switching it on and off. And we looked at the sort of the different levels of gambling, including volume, size, and regularity of gambling transactions. And crucially, we looked at the impact that was having to those customers' overall financial vulnerability, looking for triggers such as overdraft usage, missed and returned payments, and so on. Now, I think it's important to say at this point that at no point did we try to identify or diagnose addiction, or indeed any associated mental health concerns or challenges relating to gambling that those individual customers may have been going through. But what we did do was we started by sending a sort of two-way SMS to those customers, asking them if they'd feel happy to discuss the use of our gambling control facility. And of course, if they replied yes, then we followed that up with a direct phone call. Now, in that conversation, we were able to talk to them about how they could track their levels of gambling spend through the Barclays spend feature. We were able to provide other guidance on money management. But the really important bit about this is that in preparation for this exercise, all of the colleagues who were making those proactive phone calls went through a level of specialist training with GamCare. And then in the conversation, where it was appropriate to do so, we were able to offer a warm transfer over into the National Gambling Helpline run by GamCare. And by this, those customers were able to get access to free confidential advice, information, treatment, emotional support from a GamCare trained advisor. The customer feedback to this test was very, very positive. Customers welcomed the contact and the fact that we were openly discussing gambling and gambling habits. Customers talked about how it had opened their eyes to the levels of gambling. They were shocked and horrified to see how much they'd spent in black and white. Where appropriate, they very much appreciated the warm National Gambling Helpline, and in a smaller number of cases, we were able to make that handover effectively. But crucially, and this is the really big learn for us, customers told us that the gambling control that we'd launched in 2018, although it was great, it wasn't going far enough. There wasn't any friction in that journey, and customers found it too easy to turn it on and off as freely as they wanted to. So we started to think about how we would respond to that feedback. And indeed, some customers are even telling us, can you block me from gambling forever? So So in response to that, actually just in the last few weeks, so right at the end of right at the end of September, we launched some enhancements to our card control on debit card, adding that missing additional friction to turning it off. So now when a customer goes to turn off the control, and by that I mean they actually turn on gambling transactions in our app, there's actually a 72-hour cooling off period before they can actually resume spending on gambling transactions. And this is a longer cooling off period than others are currently offering. But its introduction demonstrates our commitment to acting on that crucial customer feedback, where many customers are asking us for longer periods in actual fact. Of course, the other thing to bear in mind here in recognition is that the current landscape of the FCA's guidance on vulnerability and in the guide that we've all seen talks a lot about how banks in particular should be making greater use of the data that they can see. So our pilot is the first step towards this, and it demonstrates Barclays' commitment to supporting vulnerable customers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. It is fascinating, even just hearing from the three of you to hear more about the different approaches being used in different organisations. We've had here, I think, an approach with a real focus on training and in-person support being provided by Natwest. Of course, Monzo's pioneering work on the card blocks, and Barclays, that fascinating data work and the proactive attempts to contact and support customers, giving us three very different but I think complementary approaches to how we can solve this problem. We're now going to go through some discussion and have a bit more of a conversation. We'd love your questions to help shape that. So if you haven't already, please do put those questions to the panel using the event chat, and by the magic of the internet, they will find their way into this conversation. Let's perhaps start with Matt, with you following up on that sort of question about the 72-hour block. We've had a question from a great friend of Money and Mental Health, and I know probably all our panellists, Chris Fitch.
Yeah.
Seems appropriate. Chris gets the first question, given he's on the next panel. We'll grill him later. So Matt, Chris is interested in why have you gone for a 72-hour delay on your gambling block, given that others have gone for 48 hours there?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of considerations here. Firstly, simply that if you think about a weekend, for example, if someone starts thinking about gambling on Friday evening, for example, 48 hours just doesn't cover the whole weekend, and so we thought that perhaps giving a slightly longer period would into the following working week might add as additional deterrent or added friction. We talked to GamCare about this, and their view was that 48 hours, 2 days, in many cases wasn't really enough for someone to really step back from a fluctuation in their mental health and their sort of need to start gambling, perhaps. And crucially, listening to our customer feedback, as I say, from this test that we did at the beginning of the year, many customers were asking for a lot longer in many respects, and we just felt that it strike the right balance. I think the other thing to say is, of course, is that we have enabled this in our app. So we heard from Natalie earlier, who was talking about how in Monzo it necessitates a call to remove the block. We've enabled it in the app, but in doing so, we thought to offset that, a 72-hour period might be the more prudent approach. Like everything, we're all here to learn. So it's early days. We launched it just at the end of September, as I say. So we'll see what customer feedback we get.
Thank you, Matt. That's a really helpful explanation. And I guess that perhaps take me on to a question that hopefully the whole panel can have a go at, which is, we're talking about innovative tools and techniques here to support people. How important is the customer feedback process, and how is that shaping the work that you're doing in this area? Natalie, should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, our product, particularly our support for vulnerable customers, it is completely customer-led. The gambling block came from the customers. So, we do try and focus on areas our customers are asking us to look at. And obviously, as we've grown, it does get more difficult, but we do try and, engage with our community through social media and through running events. What I would say is, I think it's user research comes into play here. It's a super important part of our work at Monzo, and has been since we launched our gambling block. So we launched it in 2018, and at the end of 2018 and also last year, we ran basically a customer survey really on questions about the gambling block, how effective it was for people, how people were finding it. And I think it's quite interesting to hear basically the same sentiments as what has been mentioned here already, that customers do see the 48-hour cooldown as useful, but there's so many customers that want either a longer amount of friction or really ideally a permanent sort of block. And so that's something that, you know, has come out of the feedback from our customers, along with a bunch of other requests, I guess, around, you know, nominating a trusted friend, for example. That was another really important sort of aspect of this that we're exploring as well. But yeah, customers, you know, they're the people who are using it, right? So we need to listen to them.
And Charlotte, how's customer feedback feeding into what you're doing at Natwest?
So we run market research groups for different types of vulnerability, along with, obviously, when we are launching different products and services, we try to gain insight for our customers, whether that's through the use of pilots or once we go live. I think it's also really important for us to understand from a members of staff perspective as well. So we run quite a lot of sessions with our teams. These guys are interacting with customers daily, and sometimes we do find that customers maybe aren't always wanting to have that conversation or aren't in the right place to have those conversations. And the final bit that we also look at is from our experts. So it's really important for us to engage with charitable organisations who deal with gambling and addictions day to day and interact with consumers. So I think for us, it's about getting resource of information from different sources as we build out our products and services. It's key for us.
Matt, what's the Barclays perspective?
Well, I can only re-echo what my colleagues have said here. I mean, you know, the very premise of the work we've done this year was all about testing and gaining that initial customer feedback, as I say. And I think you know, talking to third sector organisations as well is really important to us. You know, we have to recognise, you know, we are banking institutions. We're not experts in some of these matters, and yet there are organisations, there are plenty out there who are the experts, and actually talking to them and learning from them is vitally important. Which is why, you know, we felt it important to partner with GamCare in the initiative that I've described earlier, and indeed. Also providing that onward handoff transfer option for our customers where it's appropriate into GamCare as well. And I think the other thing is that when we went into this, you know, our internal stakeholders were nervous. Of course they were. This is the first time we've done something like this, using data in this way to make a sort of proactive contact to our customers. And we were nervous about how it would go down, what the customer's response would be. Will customers complain? You know, we actively, of course, want to make sure we're doing the right thing and not taking things in the wrong direction. So, but testing it in a small scale to begin with was the way through that, and getting that feedback from customers gives you the reassurance that you need to know that you're doing the right thing. So, so it's vitally important.
Thank you. And then a really interesting question coming from Charles Ritchie. So Charles asks, particularly Natalie, would Monzo ever consider doing positive promotion of the gambling block to customers that they identify as spending more or excessive money on gambling, and especially in light of those shocking figures quoted by Matt? But I guess actually probably all the panel can answer about this. How do you go about promoting these resources? Is that targeted promotion something you're doing? And what are the complexities of doing that? Natalie, do you want to start?
Yeah, of course. This is something that we've definitely considered that we'd quite like to do. We think timely interventions is a really sensible approach, but the challenge for us is around knowing our customers sort of, I guess, expenditure on gambling. So only about 30% of our customers currently actively deposit more than £1,000, which means quite a lot of Monzo customers don't use Monzo as the main account. So our challenge really is knowing what is overspending on gambling in relation to somebody's income. So that's the first challenge. And then from there, if we know, okay, this customer does use Monzo as their main account, I think there's a very fine line to tread between kind of overstepping the mark. Basically, we want to give our customers the tools. We want them to opt in to the tools, and we want everything to be very self-serve. But also, we would really like to kind of understand what kind of rules we could put in place to offer these timely interventions. And I think for Monzo, we're quite a long way away from that at the moment. But it's something we would like to kind of get to if there was a sensible approach. But we need more data. I don't know whether anyone else feels the same.
Charlotte, what's the Natwest perspective on that one?
I think probably back to Natalie's point, I think if we have a full kind of database of customers in terms of sort of their income and expenditure, there's definitely more I think that we can learn as an industry. And I think we are sort of growing and developing kind of the database as we start to add gambling blocks onto kind of our products and services for customers. I think there's probably something that we need to do as an industry-wide to collectively come together to help to promote the self-serve option. I think back to Natalie's point, I think it's important that we make sure that we have a fine balance between overstepping that mark whilst also making sure that customers have an awareness of the products and services that we can offer them to support with an addiction.
And Matt, Barclays.
Yeah, just one other thought, at a sort of very practical level, perhaps. I mean, we heard earlier this morning from the video that we saw, for example, a lot of people that are in these situations, they're hiding it from their family and their loved ones. And actually, when I remember back to when we designed the test, one of the considerations we had was that two-way, that text message that we were going to send. Because a lot of people's phones, the settings allow text messages to land on the lock screen. So if the phone is just sitting in the house on the table somewhere and that text message lands and someone else glances and reads it, there's a risk there. You're giving away information which that individual customer would rather, we didn't, or indeed, that's a step that they would want to take in as and when they felt they were able to do so. So invading someone's privacy or divulging information like that is a key concern, clearly. And just echoing, some of the other thoughts I've just heard, getting that balance right is crucial. When we did the test, the opening bit to the conversation was that we knew that the customers we were talking to had been toggling that MRC control on and off. Indeed, one of the customers actually openly admitted to us in the conversation that they've been doing that almost as a plea for help. So that was a sort of an easy way into the conversation. It was a hook to start that conversation. A broader proactive campaign, of course, doesn't necessarily have that same to begin discussion in the same way. So it's a harder starting point, and sort of coming across in that way where we don't certainly want to be coming across as judgmental. We're certainly not making any moral judgments about customers' positions here. We're simply intervening because we want to offer some help. Finding the right balance in that messaging is very difficult.
I can really appreciate that. And of course, we know that if these messages land at a time when people aren't ready to hear them, that can actually cause more harm as well if people are distressed by those messages. It's tricky stuff, isn't it? Really good question here from Nicola Jacks, who would like to ask about support, particularly for those affected by others' gambling. So what can banks do about joint accounts where a gambler is still in active addiction? Natalie, do you want to have first go at that one?
Yes. So this is a really interesting question, actually. At Monzo, firstly, just to explain how the gambling block works on joint accounts. So the gambling block's actually sort of tied to the customer themselves. So if I, as a customer, have a joint account and a current account, my gambling transactions will be blocked on both of those accounts. Whereas the other person who has the joint account with me, if they didn't have the gambling block activated, they could still go ahead and gamble. And the notifications of a declined transaction would still come through to both parties. So that's how it works sort of on our end. But I think what's particularly interesting about this question is when we did our survey, so part of our research when we were exploring, who are the customers that use the gambling block, quite a big chunk of customers use the gambling block because they were concerned about a family member or somebody close to them gambling on their account. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was a surprising chunk. And so, to us, that was, sort of people asking for help in that area. And so, we do provide both the customers themselves and family members the support and the signposting that they need. But I think that's a real opportunity for us and for other banks to kind of dig into and explore further. I don't know whether Charlotte and Mark, you agree?
Yeah, Charlotte, what would Natwest's perspective on that be?
Yeah, I absolutely do agree. And we possibly do have a slightly different model in terms of the fact that we have our customer protection managers. So these guys, as I've mentioned, work one-on-one with the customers to really understand what's happening. So they're there acting as kind of like a support model for the customer as we're doing kind of referrals over to the right appropriate places. So it's very much more hand-holding as they're going through kind of that experience. So probably very similar to that in terms of the fact that once we've identified it, we will obviously help the customers by signposting them to the right places. But also we can go and look at things like putting reductions on things like ATM cash withdrawals. What we have found from some of our customers that have got addictions is that sometimes when you block one channel, they will kind of revert to another channel. So it's really important to work with the customer to understand what it is that they are needing support with and which channels that they need help with. So that would be me.
Really important, thank you. And Matt, anything to add from Barclays on that one?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, our model is that the control is at the card level, sort of at an individual debit card. So it's possible for one party with a joint account to switch the block on, the other party not to have the block on, as it were. I think it's an interesting question because we've got to be very mindful, don't we, of again the sort of data privacy elements of some of this, certainly in any sort of proactive interventions, making sure that we're not giving away information to one party in that joint account where the other party might not want that information to be relayed, as it were. But as just to follow on there from Charlotte, again, our control is just one of many controls that people have access to. ATM withdrawal limits, individual transaction limits, switching off online spending altogether are all features that our customers have access to. So it's just one part of a broader conversation that we often find ourselves having with our customers around financial vulnerability more broadly, and the steps and support that we can offer, and those self-selected tools. Remember what I talked about earlier. That we offer customers to choose from in sort of being able to put the right framework around how they want to manage their money going forwards.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Another interesting question from Lisa Hardstaff is about the increased use of open banking. And I think particularly interesting given the challenge, Natalie, you were just saying about having limited visibility over customers who use multiple bank accounts. So given the increase in the use of open banking, is there anything you can do to flag individuals who've requested a gambling block, and will other organisations using open banking see that or not? Natalie, do you want to go first on that one, given the challenge you've discussed?
Yeah, I think, Monzo are really behind open banking, and we're trying to explore lots of avenues with open banking just to improve everything about the customer experience. Open banking isn't something that we've explored in the vulnerability team yet, but I think it has huge potential in this area. I think one of the key things really is for customers to not have to repeat their information and not have to kind of keep sharing their challenges over and over again. And if there is more sort of communication between platforms, then brilliant. Yeah.
Wonderful. And Charlotte or Matt, would you have anything to add on that?
Nothing additional. I would just probably echo what Natalie said. Open banking, I think, is a great opportunity for us to look at into the space. I think with the gambling blocks, obviously they're relatively new. So again, I definitely do think as an industry there is something that we could work on, and definitely some potential there.
Great. Matt, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just to agree with that. I mean, Barclays is very active with open banking, as people will know. Our app enables customers to plug in feeds from all the service providers that are now signed up to the open banking standard, and I think yeah, it provides a great opportunity as a platform for greater industry sharing. I think, as is always the case with these things, finding consensus, industry standards is all important. So that we all set a level playing field, if you like, around what we're doing and what information we are offering up through those data feeds on behalf of our individual customers. But certainly a great area of opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. So an interesting question now, taking a slightly broader lens, from Mark Fiander. Do we want firms to make moral judgments for customers about how they can spend their money? So should firms limit spending on gambling versus in pubs, for example? Who'd like to take that one first? Charlotte, I haven't picked on you first for a while. Do you fancy it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from myself, again, I think back to what we've been talking about is we have to encourage customers to look at self-service options in terms of nominating what they do and they don't want. I think there is a question around how far is too far for me, just in terms of morally making judgments on customers when they can and can't spend, unless we have got customer consent and the customer is involved in that process. That's how I would feel on that one.
Matt, how would Barclays approach that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel that it's not our place to be casting any form of moral judgment on an individual's behaviours, and indeed in the sort of interactions we have with our customers, the training that our colleagues went through in the preparation for that test that we did, we were very clear to make sure that striking the right tone in that conversation was all important. Demonstrating empathy and understanding to an individual's position is one thing, but coming across as judgmental, or indeed taking further steps that could be seen as being judgmental, I think will certainly be the wrong thing to do. I think that puts the conversation with the customer, or the ongoing relationship with the customer, on the wrong footing. I do think there's an opportunity where where I think, as Charlotte perhaps just mentioned just now, within the right framework, with the right parameters, if customers give us permission to take decisions on their behalf in certain situations, that's a different thing. But again, that is self-selected. That is the customer taking the initiative for that. It's not us as a bank casting any kind of judgment as the first instance. So no, I don't think it would be a healthy thing to do.
And Natalie, what's Monzo's approach in this one?
I agree with and echo everything that's just been said. I think Monzo is all about empowering customers to have that financial visibility, that financial control, and it's very much about sort of options that customers can turn on and off. I do think there's maybe an educational element of this, and I think before we reach things like timely interventions and start looking into data and nudges and things like that, I do think there's a bigger opportunity, a greater opportunity to kind of try and raise awareness and educate people on the tools that are available to them first. So yeah, agreed.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. A tricky question, I think, for the panel from Charles Randall, the chair of the FCA, which might be more of a request than a question you can answer right now. So Charles says he would really value a prevalence study which identifies where financing of gambling has gone following the ban on credit cards. Have we got any insight on that on the moment yet? I know it's relatively early days. Matt, have you seen anything at Barclays? I know you've got some impressive stats there.
Just before the card ban came into the credit card ban came into effect, we using the same mechanisms actually I've described. We contacted all of our credit card customers where we could see a level of gambling spend going on, to warn them that it was coming up, and from what date and so on. And again, we use that as an opportunity to sort of link in the support mechanisms that we've built up. We used it in certain situations. We said, if you want to have a conversation with us, let us know, and we follow up with a phone call. And indeed, again, we were able to offer that contact into GamCare where we felt it was appropriate, where it came up in the conversation that might be appropriate and a supportive step to take. I think more broadly, I think there's an ongoing, we continue to track how our credit card customers in particular may be accessing funds through other routes. Obviously, cards customers, all of our customers have ways to access cash, either through movements into deposits into your bank account, cash withdrawals. So we're monitoring that very closely. I think it's still relatively early, but it's something we're very conscious of, that we want to make sure that we are building as full a picture as we can about what our customers are doing, so that we can take those additional steps at the right times to support those customers where they have real need.
Wonderful. A watching brief then. Natalie and Charlotte, would you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, nothing additional to add on that one. As Matt mentioned, I think it's kind of a watching brief at the moment. We've had quite a lot of work going on just around the COVID piece, which has been interesting just to look at from a gambling perspective. So I think continuing on with that, and then obviously we can start looking at the data and seeing how that maps together. Again, it's maybe something that is an industry, potentially we could start to look at how that kind of compares across industry patterns.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. We have about 3 minutes left. And so what I'd like to do is give you each one of those minutes to, I think we've talked a lot about some of the positive things you've done here, the things that have worked, and the ways that you're building on customer feedback. But just to finish this session, I guess it'd be really interesting to hear, for me, what's the biggest challenge that your organisation faces in taking forward this work, and how do you think you're going to get around that as best you can say at the moment? Natalie, should we go to you first?
Sure. So obviously the impact of this year, all of our attention was just kind of, focused on supporting our customers through what has been obviously a difficult time. And so I think as we're kind of sort of approaching maybe a little bit more space to think about these things again, I think that's a real opportunity for us to look at what the feedback was, because we've had 2 years now, more than 2 years of feedback and experience, and we can work from that probably, from next year onwards. We're looking at developing what other tools we can give to customers for things like blocking and limiting spending, not just in gambling, but in other areas as well. And I really think that's kind of going to be our biggest challenge, is to try and pick this work back up and look at, what people, what effect basically the pandemic has had on people's spending, and whether, we can help with it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. Charlotte, what's the biggest challenge from your perspective taking this forward?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think firstly, it's about educating consumers that they can come to us. I think we need to actively support people to know that if you come to us and you are experiencing difficulties, that's okay. We will help you and we will support you through whatever it is that you're experiencing, and trying to get that message out to consumers. I think the other one to just bear in mind is consumer habits. So as Natalie's mentioned, obviously we've had COVID and the pandemic. That has obviously changed people's ways of interacting, and also looking at things like, are they moving over from gambling maybe into things like gaming addictions, and how that starts to impact consumers in different ways. So I think there's a couple of things for me just to sort of focus in on in terms of the challenges that we might face.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. And Matt, the final word goes to you.
What I'm about to say, that the pandemic couldn't have come at a worse time. I mean, there's no good time for a global pandemic, is there? But for us, you know, we just done that test in January and finished it in February, and we built up some fantastic momentum internally. And then, of course, all of our attentions had to turn vitally elsewhere, and that, you know, to a large extent remains the case. So sort of recreating that momentum perhaps is something that I'm personally very excited and looking forward to being able to do when we finally can. I think the biggest challenge for us then will be that, you know, there are, for all those customers that we can see, you know, are doing things to try and help themselves but might need some additional assistance, there's a much larger cohort of customers for whom we can see, you know, again, levels of gambling. I wouldn't like to say problem or addictive gambling, but levels of gambling that are nonetheless having an impact on their overall financial vulnerability, but for whom have never engaged with our controls. And having that conversation is probably the biggest challenge we'll have, because it's a step further back in the journey for those individuals. So finding the right tone, finding the right messages to start that conversation and move it forwards in a positive way, I think will be our biggest challenge.
Some difficult challenges there from our panel, but I'm really optimistic about our ability working together as an industry and drawing on money mental health expertise, but also GamCare and all the other fantastic organisations working in this space, that we can get through some of those challenges and find some brilliant solutions for people who need our support. That's it for this panel. Thank you so much to Natalie, Matt and Charlotte for their brilliant, generous contributions. I really appreciate it.